Okay, so today we're going to talk about how to give a summary speech, and specifically like a summary speech for a tech policy debate. So there are a few things to consider before you give a summary speech, and I think that one of the most important things is case construction. And I think writing a good case is sort of like a prerequisite to giving like the good back half speeches, right? And a good strategic case should have arguments that are defense to the opposite side's arguments or arguments about how the affirmative gets implemented, and you should exploit these arguments in a way that you can take out your opponent's arguments in the back half. So, for example, at Apple Valley this year, I read um a contention that was like two cards, and then the rest of the contention was just a bunch of arguments explaining how the affirmative gets implemented. And I think specifically in round three, we went for this card that says that the affirmative would only like on the encrypted communications topic, the affirmative would only require companies that the government asked to like decrypt their communications, which took out the argument about the military because then the government just wouldn't ask like military companies in order to decrypt their communications. So since we read these arguments in case, we didn't really have to bring them up in rebuttal, and summary was the first time that they were brought up. But by that point, like it's already very late for them and super hard for them to still answer. So that's why I think that having a good case and hiding arguments that can also take out your opponent's arguments is super like key, just starting from constructive. And the second thing that you want to keep in mind when putting together your case is how your contentions sort of interact or like how they can be weighed against your opponent's contentions. And I think the single most important thing when considering this is like time frame. So you always, especially when you're AF, it's my opinion that the negative will should always be ahead on the time frame weighing, but especially when you're affirmative, you want to find scenarios that have uniqueness that triggers quickly and a solvency mechanism that doesn't rely on something super stock. Like, for example, on the encrypted communications topic, it would be great if you had an impact scenario that was like pretty quick and solvency that was like perceptual in some way, so that even if they win some form of link defense generically to your other arguments, none of their like broad generic defense can take out your argument. And then in the back half, you can just be like, hey, this argument is perceptual, meaning that none of their defense applies, and it has super fast time frame. So like it sort of it outweighs like all the negative arguments. And when you're constructing case, you want to be thinking about these things so that in the back half and in summary speeches, you can really capitalize on like the fact that you have an argument that's super fast that also doesn't rely on like a generic link. And another part of like giving a good summary speech is like planning how your summary is going to go or having round vision. And I think that you can honestly start planning your summary speech all the way in first cross. So once they read your contentions, because you know you're going to be doing things like time frame weighing, for example. Um, okay, Summit. Like time frame weighing, for example, meaning that you can sort of write out reasons as to why your opponent's arguments take very long time. So, for example, like climate change, you can just like write a short argument about why climate change takes a while to happen. It relies on things like sea levels rising and like knock-on effects that take forever, whereas your nuclear war impact is fast. And then if you just do that in first cross for all of their arguments, it means that you can just copy paste it later in summary when you're doing time frame weighing, which saves a lot of time. And the other thing that you can do is also like write turns case weighing for all of your arguments. So like and like during first cross, or like I guess your partner can also help with this, but like during cross when you just have some time, you can just write some turns case weighing, be like, I don't know, like like our war scenario turns democracy because states are more likely to like adopt autocratic policies in times of war to fight, and then just like write that out for your arguments and how it interacts with their internal links or impacts, so that when like summary comes, you should basically have all of your weighing written out, and like you don't really need to worry that much about weighing anymore, and you can just sort of focus more on like frontlining your arguments or extending defense to your opponent's arguments. Okay, so now I guess the summary proper, where there are three, like I'm gonna break it down into like three main things. The first is case, like your case, and then the second is weighing, and the third is their case. So on your case, what I usually do at least is that I just like read a pre-written extension. I think that everyone should be rewriting their extensions, especially in tech policy debates, because like a lot of judges in PF especially, they just view extensions as a yes no question, meaning that you can just sort of spread the same extension every time, and then judges will be like, "Oh yeah, I heard that. Okay, extension check mark," and then you're done. So you should pre-write your extension and just read it at the top so that you don't forget. And then you get into the frontlining. And I think something really important in frontlining is like grouping or efficiency. So if you can notice like three or four responses that have like the same sort of, I guess, the same sort of frontline that you would make, you can just be like group one, three, and four, our evidence says X, which takes it out. Um, and I guess in order to decide which argument to go for, there's like a few important things. One is how good your argument is like on a Wang level, because you want to compare it to their arguments. So if your argument has like no extinction impact. I don't know why you would not be reading an extinction impact in a tech debate, but if that ever comes up, I probably would not go for that argument. And you want an argument that's like really fast or an argument that has good scope slash try or die weighing so that you can always go for that. Second is like how it interacts with your opponent's uniqueness. If you read a deterrence dissad, but didn't contest your opponent's uniqueness that deterrence is breaking down now, you obviously cannot go for the deterrence dissad because then it's just non-unique, and your opponents can spend like 2 seconds and just be like cross-apply our uniqueness. It takes out the deterrence dissad, and you just auto lose the debate. So you want to see how your argument interacts with your opponent's argument specifically. Um, and otherwise, yeah. And then otherwise, like it'll just be really bad for you because then they can just cross-apply their argument to take out your argument. And finally, it's just like a question of your frontlining capability. I generally think that if you've written your own contentions and you've had a few practice debates on them, and there's no like huge glaring holes, any argument, you can pretty much go for any argument, but you obviously should look at like which argument is easiest for you to frontline so that you can sort of like so that when you're frontlining, you can sort of explain your frontlines really well and just be like, none of their answers apply. Like this argument is super clean. And um, yeah, I think that's just the case part. I guess in terms of time allocation, your case, I guess it depends on what speech you're giving, first or second summary. But your case should generally like frontlining, extending, etc. Especially if you're in first summary, should not take more than a minute. And I think it's really possible to like frontline and extend your case in a minute, especially because your extension should be like 15 to 20 seconds. I guess the second part that I'll talk about is Wang. The first and most important thing is that you should pre-write Wang. For example, if you say try or die, you're going to be saying the same thing every single debate. There's no reason as to why you shouldn't be writing it down. You should just be like, first it's try or die, extinction's inevitable in the status quo, so the only risk to solvency is the affirmative. That comes before negative time frame Wang because the negative can most delay extinction, whereas the affirmative is the only chance to save infinite future generations. And that is like word for word my try or die block. And you should just have it written down because it'll always help increase word efficiency when it's pre-written. And same goes for like time frame, right? Because time frame is a question of like explaining why your argument is fast and why their argument is slower. So explaining why your argument is fast, it'll be the same every time. You can just be like, our argument is fast, preemptive strikes. It's about preemptive strikes, meaning that like countries have an incentive to attack even before attack as fast as possible. And then like that part should just be the same in every debate because your link story should not change. But explaining why their argument takes longer, that sort of goes into the like you can capitalize on time you have. Like for example, when they are prepping for first rebuttal or like moments during first like crossfire or moments during first crossfire where you can just like write out reasons as to why your opponent's argument takes longer. And I usually find that I don't really need to do much on the Wang page by the time summary happens because I have so much written out. And yeah. And I think the second important part of Wang is like meta Wang. So I'll split this into AF and neg because I think the meta Wang strategy on these sides are different. First, when you're negative, you should always be saying that time frame comes first. And there are like two main reasons for this. A is that intervening actors can always solve back for your opponent's scenarios. And B is that living longer is better because it increases the value of life. So you just should say these really quickly and just be like time frame first on the neg. Um, and on the AF, I think that you don't need to, you shouldn't do time. Honestly, I never do time frame meta weighing when I'm off. I just make a time frame argument because I know that the negative will make time frame meta weighing. But when you're affirmative, you should make meta weighing for like try or die, or if your argument outweighs on scope, you should make meta weighing for scope. So first is try or die. I sort of explained it like before, but if the negative can almost delay extinction because extinction's inevitable in the status quo, then obviously you want to take a 1% chance of like extending humanity as long as possible because that maximizes expected value. So you always vote for the scenario that's try or die. Otherwise, the negative only delays extinction, but the affirmative is the only chance that humanity like lives beyond inevitable extinction, right? And the second thing that you can do is like scope weighing. So scope is sort of strange, and I think there's like two main ways that you can approach it. The first is that you can be like, this is a way to break the clash between our time frame or like try or die versus time frame if we have a larger scope because our argument is more probable. That's just like the simple way of explaining it. And the second and I think slightly better implication of this argument is that scope compounds into probability because there are sort of multiple scenarios for escalation, right? Like if your scenario is just US-China war versus like a scenario that says North Korea, Iran, like China, Russia, etc., will all escalate post-AF, then obviously the second argument is more probable because there are more hotspots in the world. And then you can be like, probability comes first. Changes in time frame are sort of irrelevant on a cosmic time scale, i.e., like once again, it's sort of like the dinosaurs died like 65 million years ago or 66 million years ago. That's like a million years of like more valuable life for the dinosaurs. But even a 1% chance that dinosaurs could have lived longer is like a 1% chance of saving like infinite future generations or like dinosaurs living so much longer into the future that this small change in probability will sort of outweigh the like guaranteed change in time frame. And this argument is kind of confusing, but it's sort of like I guess you can think about it like this. Would you rather have 100% chance of like dying in a day or like take a 1% chance of like living for like another 80 years? And the 1% higher chance of living for another 80 years would obviously outweigh. So scope slash probability would come before time frame because it maximizes like valued life. And the third thing that you can do for weighing is that you should spam in summary and consolidate in final focus. So in summary, you want to get a ton of weighing mechanisms out, and if you pre-write all of them, there's not really that much of a problem in doing so because you can just be like one try or die, two time frame, three scope, four turns the case slash disad because they'll have to answer all those arguments. But in final focus, you can choose like your strongest weighing argument and go for that. Um, Now the third part of summary is their case, and there are two main things here. The first is like cross-applying defense from case slash general top level responses that answer all of your opponent's arguments. So I guess an example would once again be the encrypted communications topic. There's this ManPearl 17 card that we read a lot that says that companies like Google, Apple, etc. already mostly have the ability to decrypt users' communications. And when I get to their case, I'm usually like extend the ManPro evidence. It says that disads are non-unique because companies already can decrypt users' communications, and yet we haven't seen their negative impacts yet, which would like apply to all of your opponent's arguments. And this is one of the most efficient things that you can do because they have to answer this argument or like all three of their arguments are gone, especially in first summary when you don't have a lot of time to like answer all of your opponent's arguments that they extended. And you obviously should also have like specific defense to all of their scenarios, which brings me to the second part about like going for strategic responses. So there's a few ways to like frame this, and obviously you want to go for like conceded responses because that's just terminal defense. But if they don't like concede any responses, I think the best way that you can go about it is first, if they are AF, you should always go for an answer to their uniqueness. That way, if their uniqueness isn't 100%, they just don't access try or die. So that gets rid of one of their strongest weighing mechanisms. So the first thing that you want to do is extend some form of like answer to their uniqueness. Even if it's like bad, just be like, look, their uniqueness isn't 100, so they can't access try or die. And the second most strategic response, in my opinion, is some form of impact defense. And this should ideally be set up in rebuttal, right? Because a lot of impact defense cards have like 10 warrants in them, but the tag is just like cyber attacks don't go nuclear. And obviously, it is really hard for your opponents to answer all of those warrants, meaning that if they drop one, it's sort of GG, and you just extend that one response and be like, this means that they have no impact, even if their link is true. And you also sort of need some sort of I guess round vision here, because if they are going to go for an argument that's like the link alone is sufficient to turn the case, then obviously you need to answer that link, because otherwise they'll be like, even if we don't win our impact, our links turns case, which is still terminal defense to their argument. And I guess the final thing is like when to deviate slash final thoughts. So the first place to deviate is like, for example, if it's second summary and first summary just dropped a piece of terminal defense on their case for whatever reason, you should definitely just start on their case and be like, look, there's zero risk of their argument because they've dropped a piece of terminal defense, meaning it's game over, and the only risk of offense is our side. Like when you do that, it sort of looks good to the judge, and you also sort of start on the most important point to emphasize it to the judge. And yeah, and it also allows you to sort of explain this defense better, because if you spend a bunch of time on your case and Wang and then you get to their case with less time, then you might not be able to implicate the terminal defense as well. But when you start with the terminal defense and really implicate it well, then it just sort of lets you like just be like, this is the most important thing. There's terminal defense, so we don't even need to win case that well or win the Wang because they're just straight up terminal defense on their case. I guess I've never personally ran into this, but if your opponents like don't weigh for some reason, you could just start on the Wang and be like we're winning Wang, and they because they did none. So if we win our case, we ought to win the debate. The third thing is like dropped arguments about implementation slash normal means. A good example of this would be our round three at Apple Valley, where we extended a bunch of implementation arguments from our relations auth. Like I extended a bunch of them at the very top because like our opponents conceded a few of them. So there you can just start there and be like, this is also defense to their argument. The second thing that I want to talk about is sort of going for turns. And I honestly don't know why more people don't do this, because I genuinely think that a lot of the frontlining that people do on turns is really bad. So I think this sort of starts with like the fact that in rebuttal, the turns that people read aren't like a full argument. Like they'll just read a bunch of link turns, but they forget to contest uniqueness or something. So I think that this is sort of something that you can do pre-summary, where you should genuinely just choose an argument and be like, we're straight turning this argument, and just like only read like a turn to this argument, either like impact turn it or like read a non-unique and like read a bunch of link turns. Because then in that case, they can't just concede something to kick out of it, and they're gonna have to deal with that. And I feel like a lot of the time, like people just spend very little time frontlining turns, even when there's like a straight turn or an impact turn on their argument. And you can really capitalize on that, because you can just be like, they spent like 20 seconds frontlining this turn. Obviously, whatever they say in Final Focus is going to be new, and the turn is super, super clean, right? And I guess something that I have to warn y'all about though is that like extending turns is something that for some reason PF judges have like a really weird mindset about. So I personally don't think that you have to extend their argument for them if you're going for a turn, right? Like if they like drop a turn, for example, why do you need to extend their entire like uniqueness link, etc. for them? That would be like saying that like if your opponents conceded defense to kick a turn, you still have to like extend defense for them, and I just don't think that's logical. But a lot of judges do think that you have to extend turns, like extend their opponent's entire argument for them. So just like write a little bit out about how their argument functions, and just be like, concede that the affirmative kills the economy through cybercrime, and concede that that causes nuclear war through tensions and miscalculation, but nuclear war is good because XYZ, and then just like extend your argument. The extension of their argument does not have to be that good, because like judges do have a lower threshold for extending an argument that your opponent made, but I do think that it should be there in front of PF judges, because they like think for some reason that you have to extend a turn, and or extend your opponent's argument for them. And I guess the last thing to talk about is like first versus second summary. So first summary is probably the hardest speech in PF, simply because you need to like extend your case and then do Wang, and then also answer all of your opponent's arguments because they frontlined all of them in second rebuttal. And I think that the way that you want to sort of work with this is that you definitely want to choose the most strategic contention to go for, spend like as little time as possible frontlining, but still make sure that your case is clean, and then just like read pre-written Wang. And honestly, on the Wang page, I think you can get away with doing some less comparative Wang, than you would if you were in second summary. Because what I do at least is that I usually just read straight down my Wang blocks and just like explain a little bit why their argument takes longer. And that's like sufficient, honestly sufficient for judges because first final focus can get up and answer second summary Wang. So like you can leave that for first final. And when you get to their case, once again, it's a question of like how you can cross apply parts of your case or leverage defense that they have conceded to take out like all of your opponent's arguments. So I would start with like a top level, like they've conceded the defense that we read in case, which zeroes all of their arguments, and then go on to the line by line. And something that you definitely do not want to do is extending too many arguments. So usually in first summary, I extend one, maybe at most two pieces of defense to my opponent's arguments. And you just need to choose the most persuasive thing or the best thing to say because otherwise you're just going to get bogged down. Like you don't have time, especially if they're reading four contentions to like fully extend and backline three responses to your opponent's argument. So you really got to be efficient. Second summary, you can definitely like second summary, you can definitely capitalize on how first summary didn't really extend much on your case. And what I do is that if I'm usually capable of doing this, and I recommend that a lot of people do this as well, is that if you have time or if you can like have a really tech judge, you can like extend two contentions and weigh both of them because they're probably only going to extend like one or two responses max to your case. So if you have two contentions that are like really, really clean, or like pretty clean. Just extend both of them, like do the front lining, which should be pretty quick, and just like do the Wang. And that forces first final to like answer two contentions, which is really, really hard for them. And yeah, like second summary, because first summary often only extends one contention, like you can just like sort of like really sandbag on that contention and like spend an entire minute just answering their argument and like extending defense, which I think would be super, super easy. And I honestly think like evenly matched, second summary should have a huge advantage over first summary. So you definitely want to capitalize on that. And if your first summary, you really want to like get around that through better case construction or like cross-applying arguments about normal means or the way that the affirmative is implemented in order to like take out all of the negative arguments. Okay. Yeah, I guess the last thing I can talk about is Wang, and there's like two main things that I want to cover here because I've covered most things like before. The first is like defense. I think that risk of case comes over Wang, but a lot of judges for some reason don't. Like some PF judges that the way they evaluate debates is like they look to the Wang first and then they're like, "Oh, the affirmative is Wang winning Wang." And then they look to the affirmative case and even though there's like decently persuasive defense there, they're like, I think there's a risk of offense on the affirmative case, so I vote AF, which I don't think makes a lot of sense. Because if the risk of the disad is super, super high, and the AF is winning impact calc, but the risk of the AF is like really, really low, and there's like near terminal defense, I obviously think that logically the disad should outweigh because it's just more likely that the disad happens and causes extinction. So I think that if you have a judge, especially from like policy or LD, judging your debate, they also think similarly. And I know that a lot, some PF judges also think similarly. So if you, yeah, if you have a judge like that, you should emphasize like defense slash extending like terminal defense more than like the Wang debate because some like a lot of those judges care more about that. Um, and yeah, I talked about all the affirmative arguments about Wang earlier already. And the negative, I think that should go for time frame because it's the best neg Wang, and usually neg time frame Wang is more true than af time frame Wang. And the second thing that I want to point out is like link turns case, which is very strategic. So the argument that you should make is that like your link alone turns the affirmative argument. And an example of this would be that if you win, for example, on the encryption topic, that a backdoor gets implemented and they are going for the cartels app, you can be like military disad versus cartels app, right? You can be like, our link alone turns the case. If there's a backdoor that's implemented that the military, if there's a backdoor that's implemented in the military, then cartels can hack us and see what we're going to do and make it so that we cannot crack down on them. And that just means that it makes cartels even stronger, which makes all of their impacts worse. And something interesting here is that time frame meta weighing would make this offense, right? So if you're winning that the negatives link happens before the affirmatives argument, and you're winning that the negatives link makes cartels worse slash causes extinction faster, then because living longer always increases value of life, you know that voting affirmative would accelerate the impact that they have said, which sort of only makes their impact worse and is offense for the negative. Um, yeah, I think that's about it. And the affirmative can also make arguments as to why they turn case. So it's like the same thing, right? Just be like either like our link solves the disad or like the impact scenario that is like that will trigger in the status quo will inevitably trigger the negatives argument. So for example, if you're reading like an affirmative case about democracy and the negative goes for an argument about crime, you can be like, worsening democracies cause more crime as people are unhappy with their government, which is an example of how the affirmative case can turn the negatives case and like vice versa. So turns case can be applicable to both sides, but I do think that the negative has stronger like time frame slash turns case arguments, whereas the affirmative really wants to go harder on like try or die slash like scope arguments.